General, you've been the NATO Supreme Allied Commander, and I assume that as NATO Commander that you discussed the issue with other military leaders of our allies. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, I have.
Did you, or did they tell you, those allies who allow open service of gay and lesbian men and women, did they tell you that they had unit cohesion or morale problems?
Yes, sir, they did. And if you don't beg the indulgence,
Sure.
Most of this committee knows that current militaries are a product of years of development. They reflect societies that they're theoretically paid to protect. The European militaries today are a product of the collapse of the Soviet Union. Nations like Belgium, Luxembourg, the Dutch, etc., firmly believed there was no longer a need for an active combat capability in the militaries. As a result, they declared a peace dividend and made a conscious effort to socialize their military. That included the unionization of the militaries. It included open homosexuality demonstrated in a series of other activities with a focus on peacekeeping operations, because they did not believe the Germans were going to attack again or the Soviets were coming back. That led to a force that was ill-equipped to go to war. The case in point that I'm referring to is when the Dutch were required to defend Srebrenica against the Serbs. The battalion was under strength, poorly led, and the Serbs came into town, handcuffed the soldiers to the telephone poles, marched the Muslims off, and executed them. That was the largest massacre in Europe since World War II.
Did the Dutch leaders tell you it was because there were gay soldiers there?
It was a combination.
But did they tell you that? That's my
Yes.
question. They did.
They included that as part of the problem.
That there were gay soldiers among the Dutch.
The combination was the liberalization of the military, a net effect of basically social engineering.
Mr. Chairman, if I could offer one quick comment.
Sure.
I wanted to go back to your question to the General regarding the Dutch military. I have served alongside the Dutch military. I have been on an exercise in field conditions in the Netherlands where my unit served alongside the Dutch military, both officers and enlisted, and the subject of sexual orientation or don't ask, don't tell was a complete non-issue to both the Americans as well as the Dutch. And that was within the past 5 years.
I think we all remember Srebrenica, but I think that any effort to connect that failure on the part of the Dutch to the fact that they have homosexuals or did allow homosexuals, I think is totally off target, and I've seen no suggestion of that. I've seen the failures that you talk about, General, in terms of their training being peacekeeping and they're not being trained to do the kind of work that needed to be done is accurate. But in terms of any attribution to the fact that they have allowed gays in the military is no more on point than the fact that they may have allowed Dutch Africans or women, if there were women. I think it's just
My comment,
and we'll check it out.
my comment was that it was the liberalization.
I know, but I agree with the liberalization. Can mean that you don't train people to engage in combat. You don't train people to to engage in the kind of activity that you have to do to enforce the law. I agree with that. They weren't good in that respect. They were trained to be peacekeepers, not peace enforcers. I totally agree with that, but to slide over from that into a suggestion that it's something to do with the fact that homosexuals were allowed in the Dutch army suggests that somehow or other homosexuals are not great fighters. And I think that is totally wrong.
Say we weren't great fighters.
Well,
that was the liberalization of the Dutch military was a contributing factor to their failure in Srebrenica.